Welcome back to my channel, the best place for millennial professionals to bring positive change to their careers. Now in this video, I'm going to discuss the question of whether an Oxford PhD is worth having if you want to work in the corporate world. And if this is what you're interested in, then stick around. Hi, I'm Dr. John Tam. I have a PhD from Oxford in sociology, and I'm passionate about helping people bring positive change to their careers. So if this is what you're interested in, then remember to click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you can receive regular updates for when my videos come out. So without further ado, let's get to the meat of this video. First of all, whether it's worth it or not, it really is essentially weighing the pros and cons, right? So in a previous video, I talked about the pros and cons of getting an Oxford PhD in the social sciences if you want to do academic work. Now, I'm going to talk about the corporate world in this case, and so essentially the goal is different. But I do want to give a quick disclaimer that my conversation here really depends on the fact that it's coming from the social sciences. So my PhD is in the social sciences, I have it in the sociology, but there's also a lot of different PhDs out there, right? So at Oxford, we have the math, physical, and life sciences, we have the humanities, and we also have the medical sciences. And in those cases, like the medical sciences, there's obviously industry options. And the math, physical, life sciences, there's also different options out there. And I would say that it's quite different in that case. So this is specifically for the social sciences. And of course, my experience is limited. I only graduated last year, and you can check out my graduation in the video above. But basically, my perspective is from 1 year of holding an Oxford PhD, entering the corporate world, what it's like. So let's weigh the pros and cons. First off, let's weigh the cons, right? Number one, and I talked about this at length in my last video, I'm just gonna skim by this one here. Funding is scarce in Oxford, right? And especially for the social sciences, funding is super scarce. And so you will lose the opportunity cost of several years of not working to get that PhD, while funding opportunities are rare in Oxford, whether it's the college or the department. There are other people who get full rides, so maybe it's just me. And the other thing, which I also mentioned in my other video, is you can actually fail, unlike US PhDs. There's the transfer status, confirmation of status, and the viva. And those are basically the proposal, the midway checkpoint of 2 chapters and to see whether your PhD is on track, and the final defense, right? And you can literally fail at each phase. And I failed at each phase. You do get retries, but essentially I failed at each phase, and you improve as a result of that. But that's another major drawback, right? Now, there's a third con about moving into the corporate world with a PhD from Oxford, is that it actually invites a lot of bias. And as a career coach right now, I help people with their resumes and how to land a job. And one of the things that comes up quite constantly is being overqualified. And sure, a master's sometimes can be an overqualified degree for an entry-level position, right? Especially, or it's overqualified if it's irrelevant. But another major thing is that, well, if a master's is overqualified, then what do you think about a PhD, right? There have been cases where people literally had to remove their PhDs in order to land jobs, right? And because the PhD invites a lot of bias. A lot of people think PhD people are like, they're brainiacs and they're not practical and they're all about ideas and they're like, my data stuff. Like, there's a lot of biases out there against PhDs. But as you can see, a PhD can be like a totally cool person like me. I'm pretty cool, right? I'm pretty chill. When you're moving from a PhD to the corporate world, it may invite biases. Another thing is that moving from a PhD at Oxford to the real corporate world, there's a real, shock. There's a shock to your system when that happens. And what happened is that you basically set yourself up for the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's basically, when you know a lot, you feel that you know a lot of very little. And when you know very little, you feel like you know a lot, right? And so when you are a PhD, what happens is that your knowledge becomes incredible in a very specific realm of body of knowledge in the world, right? And what happens is that, well, you'll start feeling like everybody else should know this. It's common sense to you. And therefore, you'll start feeling like an imposter. Or when you speak, it becomes overly complex and it becomes kind of like technobabble. When I first re-entered the workforce after finishing my PhD, I had people tell me like, yo, dude, you're speaking technobabble. I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm like, really? It's common sense to me though. And then I realized you know, after listening to what I say in some videos or in some talks, it's like, yeah, oh, it's too much. Right? Not everyone needs to know all the nuts and bolts and details of every theoretical framework or other possibilities and whoever said what once upon a time. These are real problems that you'll need to tackle during that transition. So that's another major con of, you know, working in the academic PhD world. What happens is you build all this knowledge and it doesn't always translate effectively and smoothly into the corporate world. And so that's something you definitely need to be aware of during that transition, because sometimes you expect everyone to know as much as you and they simply don't, and that makes it somewhat painful and makes you miserable. And these are some of the major cons I can think of. If there's any other con that you can think of, let me know. I'll be super interested. Now remember, I'm approaching this from a social science perspective, so leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Now let's talk about the pros. There's a lot of pros with getting a PhD from Oxford and moving to the corporate world. Now one of the things is that it gives you essentially automatic legitimacy in any conversation. And it's like, you don't mean to do this. Like when I first graduated, in the back of my mind is like, I can't wait to tell everyone I'm a PhD. Like everyone in the room, you need to know I'm a PhD. Like you do get that, okay? I admit I had that. But after a while, you start realizing that they care a lot more about the contents of what you say than what title or what degree you have. And that generally applies in, you know, across the business world, across the corporate world. Of course, once they know you're a PhD, you get to position yourself as an authority and they'll consider actually what you're saying rather than just blowing you off and like, yeah, this is just some Asian kid who's a brainiac and all that stuff, right? I have a problem with that, especially because I look like I'm 20 something. When I go on a basketball court, like I get like 18-year-olds walk up to me, yo bro, it's like, and it's like, and then I'm like, yo, I could be your dad. Like literally, I'm closer to 40 than 30, right? So that's kind of the situation I'm in. But anyways, having that PhD in that case will give me that automatic legitimacy. As like, okay, this guy looks young. He definitely has those young Asian genes working for him, and I can't grow any facial hair. That's another major problem that I have. So that title definitely helps with that, and people will spend a lot more time considering what you're saying. But at the end of the day, it depends on the value that you bring to the table. They don't care about your title, they care about the value that you bring, the skills that you bring, and the ideas that you bring, and everything. And sometimes there's a problem with being too idealistic, because everything in the PhD world, a lot of it's just ideas. But when you actually put it into praxis, it actually becomes very difficult. When you start executing those ideas, you realize there's a lot of technical problems along the way that you have to troubleshoot, and that's actually, you know, something that you have to deal with. I would have to say though, coming out of the academic bubble, the PhD world, and having your stuff scrutinized to the degree that I had to fail 3 times, yeah, pretty much your analysis would be so sharp that it's hard to differentiate for people. Like they may not see it, but you see it and it gets painful, but you need to be really good at explaining these ideas, and that's where all the soft skills and stuff comes in. And so if you want to learn more about soft skills, I have like a playlist up here where I talk about soft skills. Your analysis would be very sharp, very insightful, but you have to be able to communicate it effectively and in a short time, because in the corporate world, no one wants to sit down and listen to you ramble about your theories for a long time. So basically, you got to get to the point. Last of all, one of the major benefits of getting a PhD from Oxford is that the network is amazing, especially because Asians, they love their academic titles and all that stuff. And, you know, PhD from Oxford, ooh. And so the network in Hong Kong is amazing, right? I get to meet Oxbridge people and I get to network with Oxbridge people. Similarly, there's an Oxbridge community in Toronto, and there's also an Oxbridge community in pretty much every other city. Now they're building an Oxbridge alumni network for entrepreneurs through the Said Business School. And the network goes pretty much with you for the rest of your life. And the alumni network is amazing. And to be very honest, if I look at the Ivy League network in Hong Kong versus the Oxbridge network in Hong Kong, I would say the Oxbridge network in Hong Kong is much stronger than the Ivy League network. So that's one of the major pros of getting a PhD from Oxford in the corporate world, is that when you go to these events, everyone else in these alumni networks are either professors, or they run their own hedge fund, or they run their own businesses, and they're all very, like I said before, excellence is a habit, right? And these are all very excellent individuals who have created a lot of success in society. And so that's another major benefit of getting a PhD from Oxford. But at the end of the day, it ultimately depends on what you want to do. And so one of the things that I do is I help people figure out the next steps for their careers, especially millennial professionals. And so if you want to learn more on how to find your ideal career, check out the PDF, which I'll put in the links below. I'll also include a personality test below, which is basically a free career personality test. It literally takes like 1 to 2 minutes to do it, but it's super accurate and it will tell you what are the things that would appeal to you at work and what are things that you should probably avoid at work based on the big 5 personality traits. And I talk a lot about this kind of stuff in previous videos, which I'll link in the cards above. And so I hope you like this video. It's basically a breakdown of a PhD from Oxford moving to the corporate world, what are the pros and cons. So make sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can receive regular updates on things that will help you in your career. If you like this video, hit the like button and share it with your family and friends. Take care.